Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do a November wrap up. So I feel like November wasn't the best reading month for me. Now I did still get loads of books read, but it just doesn't feel like I got a lot of books read, if that makes any sense at all. There were a couple of books that just it felt like it took me quite a while to read, where I didn't expect them for me to take a lot like much longer than a couple of days, 2 to 3 days, like I normally do to read. So yeah, I don't know. It just felt like my reading month was a little bit slower than normal, which is fine. It happens. And I'm looking forward to now a month of some like light Christmassy books and maybe some magical realism books in December, which is what I'm planning to do a little bit. So yeah, I'm going to get straight on into the books that I read in November. And the first book that I read, which I'm pretty sure I did not talk about in my October wrap up, this is American Panda by Gloria Chao. This is a book that we are following it's kind of like a YA book, and we are following a young girl. She is 17 years old and she's really, really clever. So she's already in her first year of college. The child of parents who are immigrants from Taiwan, and now they live obviously in America. And for her entire life, she has kind of grown up in this like Taiwanese culture, but it's always kind of felt a little bit split between her, you know, her Taiwanese heritage and then also being American, and trying to find a really good balance in that, and trying to deal with her parents' expectations on her and what she should do, the type of person she should be, the type of perfect, you know, Taiwanese child that her daughter that she should always portray herself as. And she has kind of always put her own dreams and her own feelings like of what she would like to do on the back burner. And now she is in MIT and her parents, everyone expects her to eventually go on to become a doctor. But for May, unfortunately, she has like a really big fear of germs. The doctor, obviously that isn't great. So we see May go through like this real period of growth a little bit in this book. She finally gets a little bit of distance from her parents because she is able to go to college and go to the dorm rooms there. And we see her kind of start realizing that she should be able to do her own thing and be the type of person that she wants to be rather than who her parents want her to be. But she struggles with this as well, and struggles with, you know, maintaining a good relationship with her parents. And we also see that her parents have previously cut off her brother for something that they deemed like bad, and they completely cut him off. They don't talk to him anymore. They don't let May talk to him anymore. And we see how this is also kind of impacted on her decisions on what she wants to do with her own life, because she's so afraid of that happening to her. So yeah, I wouldn't say this was a bad book by any means. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. It was very middle of the road book. Some of the relationships that May had, both with her parents and with some other people in her community and in her family, it just didn't feel nice when you were like kind of listening to how people were speaking to her, or how she was made to feel around certain people, like, you know, her aunts or her granny, and sometimes her mother even would call her fat and like imply things around her weight, which was just really awful to see. And then the way her parents do treat her when she starts kind of speaking out about how she feels and what she would like to do in the future for really, really like good reasons, and the way they treat her and the way she's made to feel is just so horrible. And I know a big part of this is a cultural thing, and you know, I really like, my heart goes out to people who have really had to go through this with their parents and have had to deal with kind of the expectations on their parents, and as well as people who I guess our first generation of parents who've struggled and who have sacrificed so much for their children to then put all of their hopes and dreams on their children, and that is such a heavy burden to bear. And I really kind of got a glimpse of that in this book. So yeah, I did find it just not necessarily a pleasant read because of all of that. And then we do find out about halfway through the book why her parents have stopped talking to her brother. And when I found out why it was, I genuinely was gobsmacked. I could not believe that this would be a reason why parents would stop talking to their child, and it was just such a really horrible thing. So yeah, I was really, really surprised by that. So if anyone has read this book and has their opinions, and obviously I am talking about this as someone who has very little knowledge of what it would be like to grow up in such a similar situation. So yeah, just for me, in terms of how it made me feel, it didn't really make me feel great. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I think the writing is fine, and I think the story would be really, really important for a lot of people. But for me, it just, yeah, it didn't give me like the nice light feelings I normally like, you know, contemporaries to give me. I went on and I finally read The Wonder by Donoghue. This is a book that I've had on my shelf for so long. I got it for my birthday a few years ago from my brother, and I have been meaning to read it so many times and I just have never gotten around to it. And now with the movie finally came out on Netflix, I was like, okay, I really need to read this book, because if I want to watch the movie, I want to have read the book first and see what like the source material is like. And I still haven't watched the movie. I haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet, but I will definitely try and be doing that soon. Set in Ireland in, I think it's either the late 1800s or the early 1900s. And we are following an English nurse called Lib, who is employed by this kind of council in this village, this Irish village, where this young girl has claimed that she hasn't eaten in, I think it's been 4 or 5 months. And people are starting to think that this girl might be a saint, or she might be blessed by God in some way, because she doesn't need, normal human food to survive. She only needs, the light of the Lord and the blessing of the Lord, and her divine faith to sustain her. And Lib is sent to investigate what is going on with this child. Is she really, not eating, or is there some, subterfuge like going on with her family? And she goes and she has particular feelings about like what she might expect to see, and she's kind of looking at this child originally as a liar. And then as she gets to know the family a little bit more, and gets to know this little girl and kind of their like background and what's been going on with them the past few years, she starts realizing that there might be more to the story than what she is seeing. And she starts trying to, like, she still can't figure out how this girl is surviving. She is literally with her almost 24 hours. She's with someone 24 hours a day, and no one is giving her food, and yet she still seems like hale and healthy, if not just a little bit on the light side. So I really enjoyed this as kind of a really interesting gaze on rural Ireland at this time, where there's some really interesting bits from Lib, who is obviously an English person, an English nurse, going into an Ireland that is still really struggling, is poor, is hungry. It hasn't been too long since the famine. The memory of that is still very much in people's stomachs and in their minds. And she makes a really good, I guess, observation at one point about the young girl who she is looking after, that hunger wouldn't really be a big thing for this girl anyway. This girl was born into an Ireland that was hungry, an Ireland that was starving, and from the first moments of her life she has been hungry. So being hungry and being starving wouldn't necessarily be out of the norm for this girl. She's just used to it anyway. And I just found that just really interesting, and then just really kind of poignant kind of observation about what it would have been like to live at this time anyway. And then there are also some kind of good observations around the church, and how the church is like, and the local church and the local priests, and how they're connected to everyone, and how strong people's faith are in Ireland at this time, and how people would genuinely like put themselves into danger and put themselves into these crazy situations, thinking either that God wanted them to do it or that God was going to save them. And for this girl, even if she believes that she is going to die from hunger, she isn't scared of that, because she's saying, oh well, God wants me to come home, God wants me to go to him. And yeah, it was just, I found very striking, a lot of things in this book very striking. So I really liked how Emma Donoghue explored religion in this one, which was a relief, because as I said a couple of months ago, I read Haven by Emma Donoghue, which is her newest book, which also has a very, very heavy religious theme to it, and I really didn't get on with that book. So I'm really glad that I did really like this one. So this one was a 4 out of stars, maybe more of like a really strong 3.5 out of 5 stars to a 4 stars, and I did quite enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to watching the movie at some point. And then I kind of listened to and then I read The Queen's Resistance by Rebecca Ross. I read the first book, The Queen's Rising, I think it was in October or September, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was like 5 out of 5 star read for me, one of my new favourite fantasy books. And this is just a follow-on. This is a duology, so this is the second and last book in this duology. And we are following on from what has gone on with kind of the uprising against this tyrannical king in this land. And we are following main character Brianna as she carries on some really important roles that she took on in the first book as part of this uprising. And she became a real leader and a real person that people respected and people looked to for leadership and for advice and for counsel. And she is kind of, in this book as well, she's learning that at some point the new queen is kind of probably going to be looking at her at some point to be her like her councilwoman, her main source, like the Queen's Council. And she'll be a very, very important role in this new king, like new queendom, I guess. But before all of that has to happen, they obviously have to deal with the people that they've thrown down, the like ex-royal family who are now in the dungeons, who were terrible people, and then also the people who supported the supporters of this king, who also did terrible acts, who are still free and roaming around, and who they may not be able to even identify until it's too late. So we see Brianna having to do like a whole bunch of things around helping her family restore their land, to helping the queen by counseling her, and then also trying to figure out who the traitors might be among them, and who might actually be again plotting to bring the new queen down, and be endangering all of their lives. Picked this up on audiobook, and I very swiftly DNF'd it on audiobook because the audiobook was unbelievably bad. I cannot stress how bad the audiobook of this was. The narrators, particularly the female narrator, literally it just sounded like Siri was reading out an audiobook. And also, for a book that is so clearly Celtic inspired, I just don't know why a publisher would choose to have an American narrators. It just doesn't make sense to me. And then also have American narrators who, for all like the different characters, particularly the lower born characters in the book, giving them like Scottish accents, and I'm not sure like if some of them were supposed to be Irish accents, but they were just really bad. And I honestly felt like my ears were falling off at one point, like as like I got into like a chapter and a half, and I was like, I cannot do this. So I swiftly DNF'd that, and then I got the ebook from my library instead, and that was a much better experience. But I will say I did find some bits in this book. This book wasn't as strong as the first book by far. I think the first book could have just been a standalone. I don't necessarily think you need to read this book to have any. I just don't think you need to read this book, to be honest. I think the first book was fine on its own. There were just some parts of this that were just a little bit too easy and a little bit too predictable. And yeah, I just didn't buy the story as much as I bought it in the first book. So the first book was really good. This one, not so good. I think I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, but to be honest, I might drop it down to a 3. So yeah, like kind of having a little bit more distance from it, I would say. And if I was to recommend this series to people, I would recommend it as just treat the first book as a standalone, because you don't really get anything out of the second book. So after that, I read The Maid by Nita Prose. This is kind of a cozy murder mystery book that I talked about in my mid-month book bash. I talked about this book quite a bit in that vlog, so I'll leave that linked up above, and I won't spend too much time talking about this. But this one I really enjoyed. I gave it a really strong 4 out of 5 stars. We are following a character called Molly, who is a little bit different. It's kind of implied, it's not stated, but it's kind of implied she's most likely autistic or somewhere on the neurodivergent scale. And she works as a maid in this really fancy hotel, and she ends up finding this man's body, this really like prestigious guest of the hotel. She ends up finding him dead in his bed, and she kind of gets wrapped up in the murder mystery of this man, and she also gets kind of framed for the murder of this man when she never did it. And we have to kind of go with Molly as she tries to figure out who did it, and to try and save herself. And she kind of gets this little band of friends who help her on her investigation. And yeah, I think I just didn't expect much from this book, so I was really surprised when I just found it really charming, really easy to read, really cozy. And it's definitely one that you need to like suspend your belief for a lot of the things that are happening in it, but I didn't mind that. I just was enjoying the story as a whole. I enjoyed Molly as a character so much, and yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I will definitely be reading more Nita Prose with whatever she brings out next. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this one. After that, I read a non-fiction audiobook, and that was Sex Cult Nun by Faith Jones. This one I originally found out from, I think it was Book Waffles, Nicole over at, is it Book Waffles? I think her name is, but I will leave her linked down below if anyone is interested. She's a really great booktuber, and she was originally talking about this. And to be honest, my ears, if I hear any books that are kind of about cults, my ears kind of prick up, because I don't know what it is. I just love reading about cults, and I love fiction books about them, and then I've kind of explored a little bit more into non-fiction books about them. And this one, we're looking at Faith Jones' own journey growing up in the Children of God religious organisation, which was pretty much a cult. And they became known later on down the line as the Family. And they were So Faith is basically just talking about her experience growing up, and she eventually left the cult when she was in, I think, her early 20s, and she went on and became educated. She'd done a lot of homeschooling, and she went on to do community college and then college and became a lawyer. But yeah, this was just a real education for me. And the first chapter, I think it's the first chapter in this book, is very, very info dumpy. And I really kind of was like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to like this. I might have to DNF it, because it was just a bunch of information around the origins of the cult and the people who went on to become the main leaders of the Children of God, and where they originally came from, and like their parents and their grandparents and their religious influences there. And it was very, very info dumpy, and I don't think it was the best way to start the book. But then once it gets into Faith's own actual journey from the time she is really, really young, her and her family are like, she grows up in like a small village in China, and we learn about her early years in her family. There is a good bit in this book around kind of sexual assault, and particularly I wouldn't really recommend this book if people have children, because I feel like it might be particularly tough for parents to read, particularly parents of young girls, because there is a lot in this book around how from the time they are kind of teenagers, the girls are kind of expected to just like have sex, or like have sexual interactions with the men in the family, and they're kind of given a choice, but they're not really given a choice, if you know what I mean. And we see Faith's own experiences with this from the time she is young, and she has some like interactions with other older men in the family, and like things that they say to her or ask her to do, or things like that she's not comfortable with. So in this, yeah, it was just really interesting and fascinating and sad at times, and I just felt so much respect for Faith for continuing her journey and like her motivation of getting out and becoming educated, and really making this like life for herself outside of what had happened to her as a child. Yeah, I think I would recommend it. I gave it a 4 to 5 stars, and I would recommend it to people if they were interested in it, but with the caveat of that there are some parts of it that are quite heavy and quite hard to read, and that there is things around sexual abuse, sexual assault, rape, and also like abuse of minors as well. After that, I read another nonfiction book, and this is called Walking Him Home by Joanne Tubbs Kelly, and this is a book around dying with dignity. And Joanne's her husband Alan they met when they were, I think, maybe their 40s or the early 50s, and they were married for 20 years, and then Alan was diagnosed with I think it was muscular skeletal atrophy or muscular system atrophy, MSA anyway. And within a few years, he completely lost a lot of his mobility. He lost, kind of clear speech. His speech became a little bit more garbled and slurred. He wasn't able to do a lot of things by himself anymore. He found it really hard to go to the toilet and to shower himself, to make food for himself. And Joanne kind of became, at a time when they were supposed to be enjoying their early retirement together, Joanne kind of ended up becoming Alan's full-time carer, which she did mind obviously, because she loved him. And as Alan gets sicker, they'd always talked about how if the time came, he would like to choose to die with dignity, because they lived in the state of Colorado, where this is a legal thing that they can do. And closer and closer to Alan's time, as he gets kind of sicker and sicker, they start kind of arranging for this to happen, and eventually obviously he does choose to die with dignity. And this is just their kind of journey around that, and particularly obviously Joanne's journey as her carer, and someone who loves Alan so much, who doesn't want him to die, who wants to stay with him, but also understands that this to die with dignity is his decision, and it's his way of kind of gaining a bit of control over his life, which is very swiftly like going out of his control, because he is losing his ability to do a lot of things for himself. And I just thought this book was so beautifully written. I really loved how personable it was. I had so much respect for Joanne as someone who, didn't set out to be a carer, but then ended up becoming a full-time carer, and the love, and she also like outlines her frustrations and her sadness and her anger at times doing that, but also just the love and the determination she has to make Alan's life as comfortable as possible for as long as possible. It as a whole just seemed so lovely as well. I just really loved reading about it, and I felt very privileged to be reading this book and to be gaining this insight about the two of them and their relationship and the ins and outs of who they were to each other. Say, even though like that, you know that like from the very, very start that Alan is obviously going to die, when it came to his chapter, I was a mess. I was a complete mess, and I can feel myself tearing up already just thinking about it. It is just such a beautiful book, and I really, really like believe in someone having the right to die with dignity. Someone going through this kind of legal system to die with dignity, and I like the fact that this, you have to go through like doctors, and there's a bunch of kind of legal things that you have to do. You can't just go ahead and do it like the next day. You have to go through a process to be granted the legal right to die with dignity. So I really like learning about that, and we don't have it in Ireland. And I really actually, after reading this book, I went and found a petition to try and get it like legalized in Ireland, because I think it is something that's really important. I think all countries should have it, and I really, really love this book, so I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I read Bloodless Ties by Katie Wismer. This is the third book in her Marionette series. I've read the first two in October, really, really enjoyed them, and this one I can't say too much because it obviously follows on with the plot and a few kind of real big like plot twists at the very end and cliffhangers at the very end of the second book. But we are following a character called Valerie, who is like a witch vampire character, and we are following her as she deals with a lot of crazy things happening in her world when it comes to vampires, including her vampire partner / boyfriend, Reed, and also this kind of evil kind of magic that is happening that has affected her and her life personally, and is also killing a lot of people outside of her own family and friends. One I kind of liked, like at the end of the last book, you knew that you were going to be somewhere other than the estate where is where the first two books were held, and you're going to find out a little bit more about this kind of mysterious character that has cropped up a couple of times in the first two books, and you find out a little bit more about him in the third book. However, I was kind of disappointed in how much we actually figured out, because I don't think we were actually told hardly anything. We got a little bit, but not much, and I was a little bit disappointed in that. I kind of figured by the third book we would have been told a little bit more, and we'd have a little bit more like ideas of what this world was about, and what was actually going on outside of the vampire estate that we had spent in the first two books. The world building was okay, but it wasn't great either, and I still feel like I don't really have a full grasp of how this world as a whole actually works, and there's part of me that wonders if the author knows herself, or is she kind of making it up as she goes along. Sometimes I kind of feel like that might be the case of her making it up. As you can probably tell, this is my least favorite book of the series. I really enjoyed the first two books, but particularly the second book. But the third book, I just felt quite disappointed in it. I think the pacing was off. It felt very, very long in the middle. Valerie spent a lot of time with this werewolf pack in this one. I actually quite enjoyed that, having the werewolf character, out more about werewolves and how they work in this world. I really enjoyed that. There was a lot of like real kind of people who were supposed to be dead coming back to life in this book, and after it happened for like the third time, I was like, okay, this is absolutely ridiculous. Why is everyone who we thought was dead is coming back to life now? Like, this is stupid. And it kind of reminded me of the Vampire Diaries, where like no one who is dead actually stays dead. And I do know from watching Katie's videos that like she loves the Vampire Diaries, and you can see that influence in the books, but I just don't think it worked in this book. I think it just got a little bit messy. It got a bit ridiculous. At the end, things ramp up really, really quickly. The last couple of chapters, and literally in the last chapter, about 3 or 4 big things happen all after one another, and I just got very confused about how messy the end was, and I just didn't understand it, because I felt the first two books were a lot more were way tighter, so I don't really know what happened with the third book. We're all disappointed in this book. I will still read the fourth one when it comes out, because I do like the series and I'm intrigued to find out what happens. But this one just wasn't really a hit for me, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read a audiobook that I actually really, really enjoyed, and I didn't expect to enjoy that much, and that was All the Rage by Cara Hunter. This is actually Cara Hunter's 4th book in her Adam Folly series, and because I enjoyed this book so much, I'm actually going to go back and read the 1st, 2nd and 3rd books, because I just really love the characters. I loved her writing style, and I loved the way the kind of criminal investigations were investigated in this book. So this we are following Adam, who is a detective inspector and his team of policemen or inspectors, detectives, as they first investigate the attempted abduction and assault of a young girl in their area, and then shortly after this another young girl goes missing, and they have to figure out if the two of these are connected, are they the same person. And then also a lot of things to do with both cases. They're really, really similar to a case that Adam had worked on, I think like almost 20 years previously. And now like that, like because they're so similar, it's cropping up, it's bringing up, did he put the right man behind bars for that crime all those years ago? Did he actually get the wrong person, and now this person is repeating, is out there doing the same thing? So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this one. I really liked all the characters, particularly the female characters and the female detectives in this book. I really enjoyed learning more about them. I love the kind of the little snippets you get of all of the characters, kind of their personal lives as well as their work lives. And then I also just really love the criminal investigation, and I love how it all kind of played out in this book. And it definitely took some twists and turns by the end of it that I really wasn't expecting, and I was really, really surprised by. And it became a little bit darker than I ever thought it would be. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this one, and I'm really glad to have found another kind of crime series that I can just like plot along with my Karen Slaughter series and my Maeve Kerrigan series that I really, really enjoy. So I'm going to add that to the crime series that I like to read like every now and again. The last book I want to talk about is Web of Lies by Aoife Gallagher, and this is a non-fiction book that is looking at kind of how big misinformation is now in today's world, and we're also looking at conspiracy theories, how conspiracy theories are obviously linked to misinformation and disinformation online. Just a disclaimer, I know Aoife, the author. I worked with her for a few years in the same company, so yeah, I obviously went into this book kind of pretty much knowing that I was going to enjoy it, because I am not a stranger to the world that Aoife works at every single day in her own career, and also what she's talking about in this book. I genuinely did not know some of the history around a lot of the conspiracy theories that are out there, and because obviously Aoife is Irish, she is kind of taking a lot of Irish angles to a lot of these kind of like conspiracy theories and misinformation agendas that are out there. And I liked seeing how she brought it all back to an Irish perspective, but also how some of conspiracy theories and like big players in this world were either from Ireland or things that like happened in Ireland like years and years ago. I did not know. I think this is a really important book for pretty much everyone who is online or not online. I think if people have anyone in their family who may be prone to the odd, I don't know, like COVID denial or slipping into a rabbit hole they find on Facebook about information that is clearly, not correct or not explained properly. I think this will be really good for people to learn just about like protecting themselves a little bit about what they see online, and how what you see online might not always be the truth. There are reasons why science is never 100%, accurate. And there's also some bits in this around, like Pizzagate and stuff like that, which was really interesting, kind of just to remind myself of what that was and how it originated and how absolutely crazy it is, and how bizarre some of these theories and some of these things that happened and some of the disinformation that is out there, how bizarre it is, but yet how people will still keep trying to say that like these things are real. It is just absolutely mad. I do think this book is written in a way that people who are kind of knowledgeable of the subject will understand, but also those who aren't knowledgeable of the subject will understand. And it also doesn't make anyone feel silly or stupid or small for ever believing in a conspiracy theory or ever being, hooked into something, into a rabbit hole like that online. As like the author, even she opens up with the fact that she once was, a victim of a conspiracy theory. And I really like that kind of, that it can literally happen to everyone, and you just have to learn how to just guard yourself a little bit against things like that. And yeah, just especially with the way the online world is now, you just have to be really, really careful about what you're reading online. Be there for people in any way you know how to, for people who are, kind of have fallen victim to it as well. So yeah, I would really, really, really recommend this. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and really recommend. So yeah. And then the last book I want to talk about is Hysterical by Pragya Agarwal. I got this book for review from Canongate back in, I think it was September or August, and I eventually managed to read it for Nonfiction November. And this book took me so long to read. It took me the entire month to read. It just felt that little bit dense and a little bit heavy, and I just found I couldn't read it for a long time. I was kind of reading snippets and chapter by chapter and bits here and bits there. And yeah, so this one is looking at the gendered way we look at emotions and how people portray emotions very much comes back to how we are stereotyped because of our gender and social norms and what people expect of you because of how you portray yourself as like a man or a woman or male or female. And I found a lot of this very interesting. I did like there were some chapters that were really interesting around AI and how AI, they're like people are trying to make like AIs be able to identify emotions and how hard that is to do. There was an interesting chapter around like the historical connotations around the word hysterical and how, you know, women have always been deemed hysterical around, you know, showing their emotions and how women are expected to show their emotions in a certain way and then men are kind of expected not to show their emotions at all unless it's just being serious and stoic because that's like the manly thing to do. I liked the chapter that looked at witches as well and witches, witch trials in history and around women who were betrayed as who were witches who women who were accused of being witches were often women who, you know, may not control their emotions so much. So they might be kind of loud or talkative or, you know, outspoken women who didn't control their emotions and therefore were deemed other and deemed wrong and, you know, were accused of being witches because they, you know, they were outside of societal norms in that way. So I can't say I like really loved my reading experience of this because as I said, I did find some of it kind of dense and kind of tough to get through. And I did find I was reading this in the evening time. I did keep falling asleep while reading it sometimes, which was kind of annoying. That's why it kind of made it slower for me to read through. But I will say coming out of this book, it definitely and while I was reading it, it definitely made me think about my own emotions and how I portray my emotions and at times when I have, you know, been sad or angry or frustrated and when I've expressed those emotions and how I've been made to feel sometimes by people in my life about those emotions and how I've been made to feel bad or wrong as if I shouldn't be showing my emotions, as if I shouldn't have those emotions in the first place. So it definitely made me feel it definitely made me think about my own emotions and how I've been made to feel about them and how maybe in the future I want to, you know, not be afraid of showing emotions and things like that. So yeah, I don't know. I gave this like a 2.5, 3 out of 5 stars. More so just because I did find it a bit of a struggle to read. I can't say it was a completely enjoyable read for me, but I do think I took things away from it that will stick with me for quite a while. So everything I read in November, please let me know what you guys read for Nonfiction November. Have you read any of the books that I've just talked about? I would love to know your opinion. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.